afternoon, everybody. Let's get right into it. Acts chapter 25 tonight. And as we get to our time of review, just remember, the reason obviously we review is to remember things and to recollect what we've been learning, but to especially set us into context of where we will be tonight. And I've got our maps up here to save time. I'm going to skip through those real quick. But remember the 3 mission journeys we see recorded in the book of Acts. We'll also talk about a probable 4th journey that Paul made that is not recorded in the Bible for us. But remember, this was the better part of about 10 years, these 3 journeys. We've come to the end of those journeys, and Paul, it's about 57 AD or so on our timeline when we get to chapter 21, and Paul reaches it to Jerusalem. And he wants to get there, remember, for the Feast of Pentecost. He gets there, and he is met with opposition, as always. And the Jews accuse him of teaching against Moses and the law of Moses and going with this sect, remember, as they call it, this cult or this sect of the Nazarenes, because Jesus was a Nazarene, and that's what they're referring to it. The believers, though, refer to it as what?
The way.
The way. Good. So that's what we're talking about, which is Jesus, the way, right? I am the way, the truth, and the life, John 14. So Paul is then accused also of bringing a Gentile into the temple and defiling it. And that was Trophimus from Ephesus. And so they take him out of the city. They're going to stone him. They are beating him. And that's when Lysias, the commander of Roman battalion there, steps in and takes Paul away from them, and they carry him up the stairs. And now we're into chapter 22, where he gives his defense to those Jews who are trying to kill him. He gives his testimony right there about how you've known me, this is who I am, and then he proceeds to the part of his testimony where he's converted, which is found in what chapter of Acts for us? Conversion is. Good, chapter 9. Definitely a big benchmark chapter there. Okay, bucket list chapter there. So, yes, we see that happen, and we see that he preaches once he gets to the part of Jesus is the fulfillment of the prophecies. He's the Messiah. He loses them at that point. They want to kill him at that point. Lysias has the Roman soldiers bring him in to protect him, and takes him the next morning before the council. Remember, before the Sanhedrin. So that's chapter 23. We see him before the council, and Paul drops the hand grenade in the room, which divides the whole room, which is what? Good, the resurrection, right? That Paul says, I'm a Pharisee, son of a Pharisee, and I believe in the resurrection, and that's why I'm on trial here. He immediately divides the room up, and they start fighting over each other's, beliefs, and Sadducees and Pharisees, and ruckus that's happening. And so Lysias takes him out of there because it said that he feared that they would tear him to pieces. And so God again providentially steps in, using Roman soldiers, using whatever means he chooses to use to protect Paul. And then remember also a plot was made by over 40 Jews at that point to kill Paul. And so they wanted to bring him back to be tried more, and they were going to secretly kill him. But God puts Paul's nephew's ears in the way there, and he takes it to Lysias, and Lysias takes 470 men. Remember that? 470 trained Roman soldiers with horses take Paul in protective custody and to take him off to, here we are in Judea and Jerusalem. He takes him off to Antiochus first, and then into Caesarea, which is where Herod's praetorium was, and where the governor would be who was going to hear him. Anybody remember our governor's name from chapter?
Felix.
Good. First one is Felix, right? So that was where we were last week. He sends a letter with the 470 and off with Paul. And so Paul arrives to Felix with a letter. Felix reads the letter, and Felix last week in chapter 24 has Paul come before him. And remember, he delays. It's apparent that he does not any part of this, because he delays and said, well, and rightfully so, he wanted his accusers to be there. That was definitely the Roman judicial way. Let's wait till the accusers get here. They came up, he puts them on trial. He hears Paul's defense, and he says, there's nothing wrong here. Like, the guy's really done nothing to deserve imprisonment, and certainly not death. And so, I'm not going to deal with this right now. You know what we'll do? We'll take a pause here, and we'll wait for Lysias, the commander now, to come up. So his side of the story. Look, even though Lysias, remember, had already sent a letter giving his side of the story. Okay, so he delays even more and says, when Lysias comes up, we'll do it. And remember, Festus and his wife now, Drusilla, who that's a character we want to remember, because Drusilla, remember, was King Agrippa's daughter. And so we're going to find out a little bit more about her family tonight in our chapter and next week as well. But she was daughter, remember, of one of the King Herods, King Herod Agrippa. Okay, so she was of a really bad bloodline lineage, and that's who Felix's wife is. And now it says, remember, they kept coming in to hear more about Jesus, about the way. And Paul kept telling Felix now, so Felix and Drusilla are hearing the gospel from Paul on several occasions. And it says that when he heard about the coming judgment of God, he was shaking and he was fearful, remember, before Paul. And so he put Paul off and said, I'll come get you again sometime later. And it said, intending to do the Jews a favor, he held Paul in prison, with liberties. Now he's still going to go on trial, so he has the liberties that a Roman soldier would have, but he just detains him for the period of 2 years until the next governor, whose name is Festus, who we're going to talk about tonight. He's coming into office, and so Felix just kind of puts the brakes on and holds the thing up. And it was a common practice, because look, anytime a new governor, anytime anyone comes into office, think about even our own state, a new governor comes in office, there's going to be cases that are carried over from the prior governor, correct? So he's just waiting out time, and the Jews are fine with it because Paul is put in, custody, and he's not going to hurt us too much if we can't do that. But notice, though, their hatred and things still haven't died down. I mean, this is going to be 2 years later now that we're going to be talking about tonight. So it still doesn't die, and we'll see that a little bit more in our text this evening. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into chapter 25 here tonight. So that's where we're at. He's been now left by Felix for 2 years. Verse 1 says, Now 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea, and the chief priests and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul, and they urged him, asking a favor against Paul, that he summon him to Jerusalem, because they were planning an ambush to kill him on the way. Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea, and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So, he said, let the men of authority among you go down with me, and if there be anything wrong with this man, let him bring charges against him. After he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea, and the next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. And when he had arrived, the Jews who came down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him that they could not prove. Imagine that. Paul argued in his defense, Neither against the law of the Jews, nor the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, seems like a common theme there, right, with giving the Jews favors. Do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and be there tried on these charges before me? But Paul said, I am standing before Caesar's tribunal, where I ought to be tried. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you yourself very know well. If I am then a wrongdoer and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, then no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. Verse 12. Then Festus, when he had conferred with his council, answered and said, To Caesar you have appealed, and to Caesar you shall go. Saying, There is a man prisoner by Felix, excuse me. And when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and elders of the Jews laid out their case against him, asking for a sentence of condemnation against him. I answered that it is not the custom of the Romans to give up anyone, for the accused meet with the accusers face to face, and had an opportunity to make his defense concerning the charge laid against him. So when they came together here, I made no delay, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal and ordered the man to be brought. The accusers stood up. They brought no charge in case of such evil as I supposed. Rather, they had certain points of dispute with him about their own religion and about a certain man named Jesus, who was dead, but whom Paul asserted to be alive. Being at a loss how to investigate these questions, I asked whether he wanted to go to Jerusalem and be tried there regarding them. But when Paul had appealed to be kept in the custody for the decision of the emperor, I ordered him to be held until I could send him to Caesar. 22. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear the man myself. Excuse me. Tomorrow, he said, you shall hear him. So on the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp, and they entered the audience hall, the military tribunes, and the prominent men of the city. Then at the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. And Festus said, King Agrippa and all who are present with us, you see this man of whom the whole Jewish nation has petitioned me, both in Jerusalem and here, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. But I found that he had done nothing deserving death, and he himself has appealed to the emperor, so I decided to go ahead and send him. But I have nothing definitive to write to my lord about him. I have brought him before you all, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after we have examined him, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable in sending a prisoner not to indicate the charges against him. Let us pray. Lord, we love your text. We love your word. We love your spirit that teaches us and guides us through it, Lord, and we ask that you would do that tonight, revealing to us the truth that you have to display and teach us tonight, Lord, and that we would gain application and growth here tonight in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. So we meet two more characters, and really we're going to meet a third too. But we've seen this process that Paul's going through. He makes his defense to the Jews, then he goes and makes his defense to the Sanhedrin, then he makes his defense to Felix. We're going to see him go to Festus, and then now we're going to see King Agrippa also next week in chapter 26 is going to hear him as well. Okay, so I think that's important because remember a couple ago how I was expressing to you how it appeared that Luke is obviously by being filled by the Holy Spirit, led by the Holy Spirit, but he's intentionally writing the case here and witnessing all the things here. We see that everyone he goes before is finding him not guilty of anything. Okay, so that's
King Agrippa?
Pretty significant. We're going to talk about him in a little bit. So Paul's been detained now for these 2 years we talked about from the end of last chapter, and that's why our take on getting the context. So now we know what's happened. Felix is gone. Festus is moved into the governor's mansion, right? And he is the new governor of that province and in that area. And so it starts out in verse 1. It says, 3 days after his arrival. So after his arrival in Caesarea. Okay, so 3 days after he got there, he went up to Jerusalem. Remember what that means. Went up to Jerusalem. We know that he went south from Caesarea, kind of actually southeast. But in elevation, it is up, and so that's how the Bible always refers to Jerusalem, because it's on a mountain, and so it says going up, and then he says, let us go down to Caesarea, right? Or let us go down to Antioch, which is way north. Okay, so again, just a reminder of that. So he says he went up to Jerusalem after 3 days. So why would he do that is what I was kind of asking myself. Well, he's now governor of a new province, a new area, and the central main city of his area Jerusalem. Okay, even though he's not stationed there, that is the main city, and obviously the Jews are kind of the main peoples that we see focused on obviously in our narrative, but at that time they definitely would have been the majority of the populace there. So he's going to go up and make himself known and make his presence known and get to know the city and the Jews a little bit more. We're going to find out later obviously that he is not well familiar with Jewish customs. Okay, we see that kind of in the narrative as we already went through it. You can see that, how he said, I'm not familiar with this. I didn't know how to do this. So the chief priests and the chief men now of the city of where? Of Jerusalem, where he is now. Okay, so they come to him. They ask him a favor. The Jews asked him a favor against Paul. What would that favor be? They want judgment on Paul like right now. Like, we don't want to wait anymore. So, hey, why don't you bring that Paul guy that's over there that for you? Why don't you bring him down here, or up here, I should say, in their lingo, us? Okay, because why? It says because they were planning, verse 3, an ambush to kill him on the way. Sound familiar? Just like the pact, right? The vow that the 40-something men made in chapter 23, which we can see now, understandably, that those guys have failed their vow. So either some of them starved to death, or they've all ixnayed their vow, which was a big deal in the Jewish law. To not fulfill a vow was a huge deal. So perhaps some of them are part of this, but perhaps not, because who we're talking about now are the Sanhedrin members, the council, the religious leaders they're still wanting to have this plot to destroy Paul, no matter how they can. Look, they plotted to kill Jesus, right? They've been plotting to kill them all. Excuse me. That's right. So same thing. That's their thought now. Hey, it didn't work then, some 2 years prior. But again, this just marks, look at their severe hatred and how much they despise Paul and how much they despise Jesus in this way, this sect, this cult that they're talking about. Because now 2 years later he's in jail and they're just still as amped up about getting this guy dead as they were, 2 years prior to that. Okay, so immediately now they hound the new governor and they hope to influence him about Paul before Paul gets to trial. They're saying, hey, let's kind of take care of this deal right now. And again, that just shows their mark of this 2 years has not really phased out and hasn't taken the flame of their hatred of Paul out at all. In fact, I think it shows that it's probably in fact fanned the flames and they're just eating up with it. They're just obsessed with this now. So, which we know they have been even prior to that, because now remember our time frame, we're about 57, 58 AD, and so we're about 30 years out. Okay, 30-ish years out from Jesus and when they killed him. So, we're 3 decades later, and they're still trying to put this thing out, okay? Which we know Satan is still trying to do that today. But we know it will not happen because the gates of hell will not prevail against Christ's church. Amen? Okay, so Festus says Paul is being kept at Caesarea. And I'll be returning there shortly. And if he did anything wrong, you guys can bring charges of him then. So look, he kind of shows integrity here. And I will tell you this, history shows, Josephus and other historical accounts say that this Festus was definitely from a noble, well-known family and was a much more noble person than Felix, the prior one. The prior governor, Felix, was not that way. He was known for, stealing from the people's tithes and their monies and just very wicked. And so this man, Festus, was known to be a lot more noble. And so in that, we kind of see that a snapshot of that here, that he's not going to be persuaded by the head leaders of this new province that he is now a part of, and kind of make friends. Let's make friends with the powers to be now, because we are going to be here. I'm going to be over them. He is over them, yes, okay, but it's still good to be in good standing with those who are leaders in your main city of your area, okay? And we've seen how the Jews use that coin and try to do that as manipulation. So he doesn't just do that and let them kind of grease the palms immediately, right? He says, nope, you know what? Paul's at Caesarea where he should be, and that's where he's going to be tried, because that's the way it's supposed to go. And if you guys want to bring it, then you need to make the journey and come bring it, okay? So they try to get this favor, and we understand why. Look, they don't even really care about the trial and bringing Paul to trial at Jerusalem, right? Because their whole intent is to kill him before he gets there. So again, it's just the plot, the scheming, the lying, the deceitfulness that these leaders, religious leaders of Jerusalem at the time, just continue to portray and continue to show their hearts in this manner. So Festus is having no part of it. He's showing that he is the one in charge. Like we said, he's not submissive to them in any means. He is over them in authority. And again, God's sovereign hand in all this, right? Felix kept him there to be tried by Festus. Lysias has been the commander who's been, helping him and protecting him the whole way. And now we see that God's sovereign hand again is going to be on this, because Paul be killed on the way there, because he already told us, remember? He already told Paul that you must go and witness at Rome. So he's going to make the journey to Rome. He's by no means going to be thwarted by a plan to kill him on the way. So he is not going down to Jerusalem or up to Jerusalem. He is in fact going to stay put right where he is. So 8 to 10 days later, now we just keep going through the narrative here. If you've got a question, or something, we can pause there. But most of it's pretty straightforward. That 8 to 10 days later now, he returns. So he wants to stay in Jerusalem for a little while, get to know the customs and the ways of the Jews, see the city for a little bit. If anybody's ever, had the privilege of going to visit, I have not. been there, but man, I'm sure it'd be awesome, you know. And so you want to check out the city and hang out there for a while, get to know the people, let them get to know you, and see that you are the new, you know, the man in the area now, taking charge. So when he gets back now, though, he does not delay, just like his letter was when he sent it about this, was that the next day he brings Paul before him, before the tribunal, it says, or the bema seat, as you like to call it there, Brooke. Same thing. The judgment seat that he would have. And so he sits in it to judge the case and to hear this trial and these charges to come before him. So he says the Jews brought many charges. Well, look at that in the end of verse 7. They brought many serious charges against him that they could not prove. You know, there's always a reason that you cannot prove something, right?
And there were serious charges. The way they say it is many serious charges. Not to add on. They're all serious.
Good. Yeah, I mean, picture in their mind, it's as serious as it gets in the Jews' minds. That's why they're accusing him and listening to those Jews from Asia. Remember, that accused him of defiling the temple by bringing a Gentile into it, because that would have been punishable by death.
But they didn't even show up.
Right. That's right. But still, they're still going to throw all these things at him, hoping something's going to stick. Right. You know what I mean? So they're going to do all that, and not even mindful of getting caught in lies and false charges, which would be an offense by them. You know, they're not really caring about that. They're just trying to get this stuff to stick on Paul.
What if somebody would have actually done that in the temple? Would they just killed them, and the Romans wouldn't have cared? If the Jews killed somebody for doing that, they would have just moved on. There would have been a ruckus.
Well, a lot of the stuff the Romans would let them have kind of jurisdiction on some of it. And so that's kind of the whole point. Even like Pilate said, or even like some of them said before that, you know, like, look, I'm not doing this. This isn't anything wrong with us. You guys deal with it how you want to deal with it. And so they would do that some, and that's why, you know, remember that this King Herod is there and has some authority, you know what I mean, over the Jews. Now, the governor in the Roman people, the leaders would have been over them, but still, they were still allowing things to happen and let the Jews kind of do their thing, as long as they stayed good little submissive Jews. You know, don't cause any riots. You know, don't let the zealots rise up and come in anarchy and all that stuff. Keep everybody in line, and it'll be good for you, and we'll be good to you. We'll let you kind of do your things that we might not even agree with, but if they don't really matter to me, and I don't know who this Paul guy is, and I don't care about your rules and your temple and what you did, and I don't care if he dies for it either. Okay, so yeah, good point, Sam. But let's not be too thinking that, you know, they're really too mindful of it. And again, that shows God's hand upon this, that He is going this far to find out the truth in this situation. You know, it's just God's plan of protecting Paul to get him where He wants to get him. You know,
that's kind of what I meant. Like, it seems like if it was somebody else, they would have just killed him. They wouldn't have went to the Romans. There wouldn't have been this big stink about it. Just
right, like, which certainly they tried. That was chapter 21. They tried to do it right then, and that's when the Romans heard the commotion. They were beating him, about to kill him outside the city, and they grabbed him and saved him. Yeah. So certainly they were already going to do it, and like you said, they'd done it to others. You know what I mean? So they could get away with what they could get away with, for sure.
Probably a little easier if it was true too. Like,
yeah.
If you had that many more witnesses, if you actually did defile the temple.
Well, and all through Acts, we haven't seen a problem with, though, the mobs being stirred up on false charges. There really hadn't seemed to be that there had to be any truth, as long as you get a crowd stirred up that wants blood. And, you know, well, one was saying this and one was saying that. How many mobs did we see that they didn't even know what they were doing? They just wanted to be a part of it. What's going on? You know, so, yeah, so really it didn't take much. It just took what? Really, it took the leaders, the religious leaders' word that they were saying, we're all engaged, we're all together on this, and then the people kind of got behind it and just stood with him, you know. And we saw that again with Jesus, same thing.
They do everything in the name of God, too.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. They'll twist it to say this is God's work, this is what God's law says. That's right, and just use it for their good. Good. So now we see Paul again, verse 8. We see Paul again in his defense. Paul argued in his defense, and we're going to continue to see that. As he says, neither against the law of the Jews or the temple. So there you go. He's saying, I did not do that. So let's not be confused either about the fact. Remember that it said that the Jews from Asia said that he brought a Gentile in the temple, and it said they thought that because they saw Paul with Trophimus in the city. So they saw him in Jerusalem with a Gentile, And they accused him of that. And what we're finding out right here in verse 8 is he did not do that. Because God's word says that Paul said he didn't do it. Okay, so false charges, and that's why we call him that. So he did not commit against the temple, against the Jews, or against Caesar in defense. And so now we get to the part again here of Festus wishing to do the Jews a favor. Which again we saw by Felix in the last chapter. Wanting to do the Jews a favor and leave him in jail there. And so this favor he's talking about is kind of twofold, because yeah, the Jews would have liked to have had him there, because look, didn't they already ask for that? They already asked for him to be tried there. When he says, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me on these charges, note that he says before me. It's not like he would have been, in his mind, just handing them over to the Jews, him not knowing the Jews plot to kill him on the way. Understand? So, that was the deal. Is look, he's thinking maybe you were accused in Jerusalem. There's witnesses that perhaps could be around to testify of this that were in Jerusalem at that time, and then we find out later, though, in his letter here, in his recap, I should say, as he tells Agrippa and Bernice and gives them account of what he has found out in his investigation so far, he says that he didn't know what to really do on judging these matters. So really, he was kind of trying to help himself out too, and kind of let the Jews steer this thing to help him, because he really doesn't know what to do. And we found out about the last governor, Felix, that he was well versed in the Jewish customs and traditions and ways. Remember, Paul said, I'm happy about that, because that's good for me. This guy, not so. So he's kind of being, as he goes, he's kind of being thrown in the fire here with a crazy case, and maybe wants to let the Jews help him, guide him through this process of how this should go.
It does sound like the Romans are kind of backing them on their laws that would be sensible by death. It's like, okay, well, if we find him guilty of
That's
those
right.
really harsh laws that you have, we'll back you up on that. But
Right.
you still have to prove it. Like,
Right.
they
They would still allow them leeway to do it, but especially now that they're involved, they got to make sure their hands are clean of it in the whole situation, and that there's not something going on that they don't know and they could get in trouble and their necks are now on the line. That's always the Roman side's concern, is I don't want my neck on the line. I'm accountable to the governor. The governor's accountable, to Caesar. Which at this time, who are we talking about as Caesar? Anybody remember? Who's the emperor of Rome right now?
Is it Nero yet?
Yes, Nero. Yep. It's already Nero. Nero was about, I think, 54. I think is about when he started. I've got the dates in here, I think, for this week or next week. But I think he ruled from about 54 to about 68,
So
right in there.
Festus and him both kind of came into office real close at the same time.
Close. Festus is now, we're about 58 now.
So 8 years.
So
give or take.
So he would have been in for a little while, and Nero was there already. So that's who we're talking about. So when he's saying I'm appealing to Caesar and I'm going to take him to the emperor, Caesar, emperor, same thing. But that's who we're talking about. We're talking about Nero. So in history, we know who Nero is now. So we can call him by name as well. Okay, so Paul says, look, I've done nothing wrong, and I'm standing where I should be tried. I'm standing, on Caesar's tribunal, standing before the Roman governor, and this is where I should be tried, especially as a Roman citizen. I should be judged as a Roman citizen. Remember, he's got that card to play that's been very helpful for him so far. And he says to him, look, I've done nothing wrong to these Jews. You've seen this, you've heard this, and you know that I've done nothing wrong. So, I don't know why we're going to keep going through this. And to just be bold about it, he says, if I'm a wrongdoer and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. So he says, look, if I've done something worthy of death, that's fine. Then I'm not saying I don't deserve to die then. I mean, I'm a law-abiding Jew. I understand the rules and the laws and how it works. And if that were true, then I would not be trying to get out of it. And so that's all he's showing in his stance, is he's being bold to show his integrity and show that he's standing upon his story. But if these men's accusations are true, then no one can hand me over to them. That they have no right to do what they want to do to me if they're lying. And so you should not deliver them into my hands. and no one should deliver it in my hands. And guess what? Paul already hearing from Jesus himself, he can clearly say that no one's going to turn me over to their hands, right? He already knows that's not going to happen. So if these things they're saying are false, then no man's going to turn me over to them. You know, it just kind of reminds me of in that sense of the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego moment. You know, like our God is well capable of delivering us. Don't worry about that. So if he chooses not to, then I'm good with that. But he already knows God's plan for him to get to Rome. Okay, so now he uses again that Roman citizen card and says, I appeal to Caesar, because he sees the kind of tug of war that's happening inside of Festus, because he's new. He wants to make good kind of with the Jews also, and wants to figure out what am I going to do here to where it doesn't cause me problems, but the Jews don't cause me problems. And so Paul just kind of senses what's happening here. Is like, look, I'll take it to the Supreme Court. You know, like, just take me to Caesar, to the highest level of the tribunal and the judgment, and I will go by his judgment. And so being a Roman citizen, he could ask that, and he would be given that as a Roman citizen. So that was his right now as a Roman, was to appeal it all the way to Caesar and that kind of Supreme Court, you know, in our day and age, that he could take it all up as a Roman citizen.
It sounds like the Romans are kind of like used to, like they don't really trust them either. I mean, like, you guys are always doing this false accusation.
Yeah, hopefully he's
I
been
don't
reading
think they're
his letters from all
trustworthy.
the other leaders and seeing just what a thorn in the side these Jews are, you know?
But Paul's not going against them.
Yeah.
At all, right?
Right.
Paul's saying, okay, if you guys can't prove me wrong, I've done nothing wrong. I know the law, but he's not saying like, you know, he doesn't have any intention of saying, okay, if you can't prove me wrong, I'm taking you to court. You know what I'm saying? Like, he just wants to get it done, you know.
That's right.
I see that. He's kind of humble there. He's not like after them. He's like, hey, you know.
And there was your dates there, guys, if you missed it. Nero, 54 to 68. Obviously, these numbers are going up now because we're in AD now. Okay, so we understand that. So it's 54 to 68. So with that being said, I put that little thing in there
For Nero.
to show you that later on we're going to see Nero again, because and actually it'll be from this time, because he's going to go to Nero now to be tried in Rome, and that's where he's going to be in the 2-year. As we get to the end of Acts, he's going to be in 2-year house arrest in Rome. And Caesar, in fact, I mentioned this a couple weeks ago. Spoiler alert to ruin the end of the movie. But he is going to be released at that time by Nero. So Nero is going to hear Paul's case and say, yeah, you guys are all right. He's done nothing wrong and worthy of death or imprisonment, and you're free to go. So the appeal works and gets all the way, and God protects him all the way and lets him go. And that's going to be in about 62. So right now, where are we at? We're about 58. So you see that the journey is going to take a little while. Okay, we got about 2 more years now before he even gets there, and then 2 years of the house arrest to get to trial to Caesar. So we're about 4 years out from that, and Caesar is going to release him in 62, but he is going to come back and be imprisoned by Nero in 66, and then executed by Nero in 66. Okay, and we'll talk about that a lot more in our next study. No, that's wrong. That's a typo. So, no. Yep, good call. That's a typo. It'll be in 66 is when Paul is in prison the second time. Good catch. Good call. And he dies in 66 AD.
And 70 AD, Nero still.
70 AD is Jerusalem's destruction and all that good fun stuff. But he's not. He's out of there. And I think that's where I got my typo, because I was putting Nero's numbers in there, which was to 68. We'll talk about it more in the church history thing. There's going to be like 4 people that are kind of fighting for authority after Nero, and Titus is going to be one of them. And Titus is the one who actually, is there for the destruction of. He's the one that's known for the destruction of Jerusalem in 70. So it will not be Nero. Okay, but my point of all that is to say that Paul's going to go before Nero 2 times. Okay, and one time's going to go his way, and one time's not going to go his way. But that's just God's way of doing it. So Let's get back to our narrative here tonight. Festus then says, "You have appealed to Caesar, and to Caesar you will go." And it appears it said when he had conferred with his council. So there is other members of his cabinet, so to speak, there, and helping him in guiding and directing this, okay? So he confers with them, and he realizes, look, Paul is a Roman citizen, and you've appealed to Caesar, then that's fine, and kind of gets to wash his hands free of this thing and say, that's good, that's fine, you can go to Caesar. And again, God's sovereign plan. When we go back, it's chapter 23. When you go back to chapter 23, that's where God says to him that just as you have witnessed of me in Jerusalem, also witness of me the same way in Rome. And so he knows he's going to be getting there on this journey. Okay, now, verse 13. When some days had passed, so after several days, King Agrippa and Bernice arrive at Caesarea. So they come up to do what? They greeted Festus, it says. So they come to pay their respects to the new governor, right? Remember, King Agrippa has some authority. The Herods, remember he's one of the King Herods, and the Herods had a line of kings that we've talked about a few times that the Romans appointed and put in place. They were not descendants of, David and Solomon and the kings of Judah. They were of very bad reputation, very evil, wicked men. And so we've talked about them several times. Remember, King Herod the Great was the first one. He's the one early Matthew tries to kill baby Jesus, who was born. He kills all the 2-year and under males in all the Jerusalem area. That's Herod the Great. His son then is the next one, and they're all called Herod. Herod just means king. It's like Pharaoh. The next one is Herod Antipas, who is Herod the Great's son, and he is one who, in early Matthew as well, gets John the Baptist and puts him in prison. He ends up killing John the Baptist.
Right.
Then King Herod's grandson is the next, Herod the Great's grandson is the next one, who is King Agrippa the First, and he is the one we met in chapter 12, who killed James the Apostle and put Peter into prison, and Peter got out. And now this is his son. This is King Agrippa the Second. Okay, this is who that is. That's the son of the guy in chapter 12 who killed James and put Peter into prison. Okay, so that's who we're talking about. These are the two characters we're meeting. Let me finish on Bernice real quick. Now, Bernice, no, let's stop there. Is it about Herod's? Go ahead.
It's just a question like they're king of the Jews?
Yes, yeah, so they're the king of the Jews over Jerusalem, but still under the thumb of the Roman governor and commanders and all that stuff.
Appointed by Romans, all right?
Yeah, the Romans put them in place. Look, the Romans put them in place to deal with all this junk we're talking about. The Romans don't want the Jewish junk on their plate and on their table all the time. So that's why they allow the Jewish king to be still in place and their kind of customs and traditions to keep going. As long as they don't bother the Roman way, they'll allow that and let them do their thing and kind of keep them happy but in check, because they don't want to deal with any of that stuff. So King Agrippa would deal with that. The high priest, the chief priest, all of those guys would deal with all that stuff. And if it became a problem, then the Romans always had the final say and could do what they want to do.
And when did the Romans take over the Jewish people?
They already have.
No, when did they start? Well, who was before them?
Well, the people before them would have been the Greeks. So I don't know the exact dates. We'll have to look that up. I don't know that
no, just
off
curious.
the top of my head. So they would have been taken first. Israel was first taken. Remember, Israel split. So you got 10 tribes in the north, 2 tribes in the south. Israel or Samaria is the north. Jerusalem is capital city of Judah in the south. The north is taken over in about 722 BC by Assyria. The south is taken over about 100 and something years later, about 587 BC by who? Who took over Jerusalem and Judah? Anybody remember? Who came in and busted?
Babylon?
Yes, Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. So
Nebuchadnezzar.
Babylon comes in when Nebuchadnezzar takes charge of the southern tribe, and that's who we're talking about now. So it's them, Babylon, then the Medo-Persians conquer Babylon and are still over the Jews. Then the Greeks conquer them and over the Jews. and then the Romans now have defeated and are overcharged of them. I just don't know off the top of my head
No, I was just kidding. I'm just
when
trying to-
exactly that was. But that's in fact why the New Testament, all the manuscripts are written in Greek, because Greece was in power and charge and everyone knew that language and that's what it was written in. And then now when we're reading it, now we're in Rome and our narrative has the authority.
It's almost like every time you hear king, it is like Jewish. They call the other, like Romans are called, like there's
Like
Caesar,
Nero,
and,
Emperor Caesar,
It's just a
like
different
pharaohs,
name, right?
Abimelechs. Yeah, they all have like their own name for king. Yeah, but same position, same thing. Good. Well, we have another family members here, so let me introduce you to her. Bernice, who comes with Agrippa. Catch this now as I'm saying this. She is the daughter of King Agrippa the First. So if King Agrippa the Second is the son of King Agrippa the First, and Bernice is the daughter of King Agrippa the First, what would that make them?
Sisters.
Brother and sister. Okay? Probably sisters is probably more accurate. But that would make them brother and sister. And we already know that we met last week. Felix's wife, Drusilla, is also the daughter of Agrippa the First. So you have Agrippa the Second, Drusilla, and Bernice. Drusilla is married to Felix, the old governor, and Bernice is married to her brother, who is now the King Agrippa II.
They're so lawless compared to the Sanhedrin and the...
Huh?
It's like they're lawless, like the king's court is
Oh yeah.
lawless
Oh, they're
compared to
definitely
the-
lawless and don't care about anything. I mean,
There's no
just
religion.
follow any. Go Google a good site, a reputable site. I can send you one if you want, and yeah, just read some history about the line of the Herods and stuff. I mean, we're just scratching the iceberg. We're at the tip of the iceberg here. It's pretty bad. I mean, that's what John, remember, was in prison for. Okay, was because
Maybe the rednecks.
that's right, because remember Antipas was the one he went against because he was the Herod and his brother Philip wanted to be Herod, and so he wasn't, and so Antipas went and took Philip's wife to be his wife. Remember, her name was Herodias, and so that's why John stepped up and said, that's wrong for you, exactly what you're thinking. That's wrong. You can't take your brother's wife. He's alive and this is unlawful and it's wrong, and for that he put him in prison, but he wasn't going to kill him until, remember, Herodias was so wicked and evil that she sent her own daughter, Salome, to go before her brother the king and do some sexually pleasing dances before him, and pleased him enough to where he offered her half the kingdom. I'll do whatever you want. And she asked, because her mom told her, to ask for the head of John the Baptist. And so that's just another evil, crazy story of this, wicked family. So that's just two of them. So go read more of them later and just find out how wickedly awesome they were not. So anyways, that's the Herods. That's who we're talking about. So we see Herod Agrippa II and Bernice here. And it says, while they came, they were there several days. Festus lays out Paul's case before Agrippa. So again, Festus has the say-so, but he's asking help. Remember, he was kind of seeking help maybe from the Jews, but Paul ixnayed that by appealing to Caesar. Now he is asking for Agrippa's help because why? Agrippa is well acclimated and understands the Jewish ways and Jewish customs. Okay, he may be evil and wicked and not doing them, but so are the Pharisees and Sadducees. Okay, so he is knowing for sure all their ways. And so this man, Paul, he says to him, was left a prisoner by Felix. We already know that. So he kind of gives the recap here that while he was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and elders brought charges and asked judgment against him, and actually asked a sentence of condemnation against him right there in verse 15. So, they wanted him to be condemned right now, and don't even worry about the trial. This guy's guilty, and you can just believe us. Just take our word for it because we're so honest. He says it's not a Roman custom that would be happening. You got to go on trial before your accusers. And he says, after they arrived, I did not delay. And he didn't. Remember, it said the next day. So he got there. He did not leave Paul sitting in prison. He went the next day and said, hey, let's try to take care of this and hear this thing. If only our judicial system was so expedient. Okay? The accusers brought charges that I did not expect, he says. So this was by no means, as we heard earlier that you were pointing out, Joe, that they brought serious offenses against them. Remember, they were serious offenses to the Jews, okay? But when he hears them, he's like, what are we doing here? Like, this isn't at all what I thought you would be accusing him of. You know what I mean? He expected to hear something totally different. And he says, it says even, it's not in my Bible here, but it's in my notes, which is from NASB. So it's got to be that one that says they simply, if anybody has one. But some versions say they simply had disagreements. Okay, so to him, this is no big deal. He's like, look, they're disagreeing on their religion, which I don't even care about. Yeah, you know, it's the Jewish religion and tradition. Oh, and they're arguing about this dead guy named Jesus, whom Paul asserted, which anybody version have anything other than that? I think ESV and NASB both have Paul asserted him to be alive. Anybody else have something else there?
Affirmed.
Confirmed?
Affirmed.
Affirmed. Thank you. Yeah, because it's in verse 19. So essentially, I'm bringing that up because when you read it and I looked at it, it's Paul asserted to be alive, or affirmed to be alive. The actual word there means to keep affirming. So Paul is making it known that every single time these guys bring this up, and he's bringing it up in his rebuttal to Agrippa now. He's like, yeah, these guys are arguing about religion, they're arguing about Jewish stuff, and about some guy Jesus that's dead, I guess. Oh, but Paul just keeps saying he's alive. You know what I mean? Like, that's what he's saying. He's like, yeah, but Paul just keeps telling us he's alive. Like, keeps affirming and keeps saying it. So Paul's just giving the gospel over and over and over and over. You know what I mean? And the Jews are like, that guy died 30 years ago. And Paul's like, he's alive. You know what I mean? Just constantly, not dead, didn't stay dead. 3 days later, you know what I mean? It's like, you can just picture Paul never ending, just never stopping, hammering away at people.
Who's on first?
Yeah, that's right. Just over and over and over. And there's some application. Let's keep preaching the gospel, keep hammering it home, and no matter what we do. So, being at a loss. Here we go. Being at a loss on how to judge such matters. Because he's new to the area. He's the new governor. He doesn't know much, you know, in the Jewish ways. Obviously, as Agrippa would know, as the Herod would know. And so, or as Felix, his predecessor. We talked about him, that he knew, he was there for a while, knew the Jewish customs and their ways. So he says, I asked him being Paul, if he would go to Jerusalem to stand trials on these matters, since they happen there, and they can help me through this process, they would know more. But Paul appealed to Caesar, and I heard that, and I said, I will go ahead and send him to Caesar. And now Agrippa jumps in and says, well, I would like to hear him for myself. And Festus said, tomorrow you shall hear him. And in fact, you and all these other distinguished men will hear him. Okay, so it's not like, I want to note here that Agrippa doesn't have any authority in this matter. Okay, it is not his word and say so. Agrippa is not going to be like, yeah, no, he should be set free, or yeah, you should give him to the Jews, and that's what Festus is going to do. Festus is in control right now, right? And actually, he's Sam. So actually, he's already made the decision to send him to Caesar. Okay, so he's already said, I'm not even making a decision on this. Nero is going to make the final decision on this, but Agrippa wants to hear the case, and so he does him the favor and allows him to hear this, and plus he gets to hear it again for himself, and maybe Agrippa can shed some light, on the Jewish perspective to Festus, and he can kind of understand these things a little more. So it definitely could be helpful for him. But I want to note this part. Agrippa certainly would want to hear Paul. Okay, being as he is a Jew, well, he's not really a Jew, like we said, he's appointed, but he is in sense of the customs and the traditions and knowing the Jewish ways, that he is the king of the area of the Jews, and he definitely would desire to meet Paul and to hear Paul, because he well knows of Jesus and the way, and he well knows of this one Paul who causes a ruckus and riots and commotion and division everywhere he goes. He knows all about him, because why? Why would he know about him? Well, he's a Herod. His daddy knew about him. His daddy's daddy tried to kill Jesus from the beginning, or his daddy's daddy's daddy. So, he knows the history of this thing that's only been now, like we said, 30 years. 30 years ago is when his granddad was trying to kill, the king of the Jews, Jesus.
King of all kings.
That's right.
Yeah. That's
So
right. Good
he
rabbi.
knows of this, and we're going to see later on next week in chapter 26. Looking at my notes here, I'm not. Paul says to him, to King Agrippa, he says, "For the king knows about these things, and to him I speak boldly. For I am persuaded that none of these things escaped his notice, for this has not been done in a corner." Okay, and we'll talk about that more next week. But essentially, what's he saying later? This is when Paul gets to talk to Agrippa, when Agrippa hears him tomorrow or whatever the next day is. And so he says to him, "I'm happy to say this to him." He's like, "This hadn't been done in secret." King Agrippa knows everything about what's happening, and Paul tells us that next chapter. Okay, so he wants to know Paul. He wants to hear Paul and hear what he has to say. Okay, so the next day now, verse 23. On the next day, Agrippa and Bernice come out with great pomp. And I think that's significant. It's significant to me. I hope it's... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Pomp.
What's pomp?
Pomp and circumstance, big time. Yahoo! Look at me.
That's right. Yeah.
So just for
Look
you-
at me! Look at me! Look at me! I'm the show. Look at me arrayed. Look at me arrayed in my kingly wardrobe and attire, and I'm coming in, parading my wife, and coming in and doing those things because I'm the man. That's what they're doing. And the reason I think it's significant to point this out is because in chapter 12, Agrippa the First, his dad, remember, was the one who killed James the apostle and had Peter in prison. And remember what happened at the end of that chapter?
Christian.
At the end of that chapter, it said that he made a speech in front of the people to tell how great he was, and it said that God struck him dead and worms ate him.
That was.
Remember that?
That's the one that his.
That's the end of chapter 12. That's Agrippa the First, this guy's dad, who came in with all the pride and the arrogance, just like these two. His son and daughter are now coming in with the same kind of prideful arrogance that God struck their dad dead for back in chapter 12. Okay, so I thought that was noteworthy.
They're so full of it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So the apples don't fall far from the tree, right? As they say. So Festus now calls Paul out, which means he brought him out, and brought him in before Agrippa and all those who were there. And he announces them and says, "You see this man that the Jews at Jerusalem and here say loudly that he should not live." And remember, we've seen that over and over when they were yelling, even the crowds in chapter 22. Remember, away with him? That's what they're saying, away with him, meaning this man should not live any longer, that he should die, that he needs to be put to death. But he has appealed to Caesar, and I've decided to send him to Caesar. Yet I have nothing definitive to say to my Lord, being Nero. Therefore, I've brought you before him, or I've brought him before you all, I should say, and especially King Agrippa, so that I'll have something to write, because it's absurd to send him without something to write. That's where we close the chapter. And now going into chapter 26 next week, we are going to see Paul before Agrippa now, giving him, his defense account again, as we continue to see that. So, why would he say especially before you, King Agrippa? I think we've already unpacked that enough. Hopefully we understand why. Because Agrippa is well versed in all these things, and knowing the Jewish ways. And so Festus is looking forward to his input on the matter. Anything else stick out in there? Or thoughts, questions?
It's just funny how that one family, all the way from the beginning of Christ, goes all the way down. It's involved with, they've been looking for Christ for a while, and they never found him because the first guy, he missed them out because
right.
they went to Egypt or whatever. But
Right.
it's interesting. This whole family dynasty is one king, the true king, and then all these other wannabe kings, following. They're actually going parallel to each other, but
Yep.
one dies off and the other one dies. He's not
And
dead.
the amazing thing is,
Crazy.
there's going to be some awesome stuff. I know I let the cat out of the bag. I think that was last week and told you some of it already. But going through this church history study that we're going to continue on next, just a study and the stuff I've been doing, you're going to find it remarkable what's going to end up happening with that line, with those people. So but God's using them in two ways,
Off.
to His ways. And like you said, it was going to be a good trivia question, but you already gave it away, which was good. But yeah, remember Herod tried to kill Jesus around that area. The angel of the Lord came to Joseph, remember by dream, and told him to take the young child and his mother to Egypt.
Egypt.
Yep.
From Egypt, I will call them.
That's right. From Egypt I will call my son. That's right.
Question. So I remember back, like in the Old Testament, I think it was Samuel. Samuel was a prophet, and the people wanted to have a king, and
Right.
Samuel appointed a king.
Right. Saul.
And at what point did they stop
Funny,
appointing their
Saul's
own
his name
kings?
too. And what?
At which point did they stop appointing their own kings, and Rome took over, and they appointed the king, Agrippa?
Okay, good question. So that's a great question. And I'll pose it out there in case it didn't get picked up on the recording or anybody else didn't hear it. So the question on the table is Samuel, which you are correct, was a prophet. When the people wanted to have a king, they said, let us be like other nations and have a man rule over us. And Samuel kept telling them it's a bad idea. God said, give in to the people, let's, and just do what they say. And he gave them a king, which was the first king of Israel, which was who? Saul. Good. Obviously not the same Saul, but it's too that they're both actually from the tribe of Benjamin. So they're both from the same tribe. So who knows what that looks like. Maybe Saul was actually named after Saul. Probably not, but just funny. That the question is, when did those kings, when that line of kings stop? The answer,
Right
anybody have an answer on that?
Paul,
Pose it that way.
Saul was the only one, because after that came David, Solomon, and then they got taken over, so it was just one, right?
Well, there were still kings all through that time. They still had kings in the north and the southern tribe.
Okay, I'm wrong.
What would be the always right answer of when did the line of kings stop?
Hasn't.
They haven't, because Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of he will be the reigning king of kings, and he is in the line of Judah and in the line of David, and will one day reign here. So it hasn't stopped is the right answer.
Right.
But I know when it has
It's a
stopped.
false
In our
king.
time
These
frame, it
guys-
has stopped. Is there a king in Israel right now?
No.
No. And there hasn't been from the time of Babylon. So look, when we talked about the two splitting and the two kingdoms. Assyria came into the northern kingdom and wiped them out. There were no more kings in the north after that. And then the Samaritans all intermingled with all the other peoples, and they all got weeded out. And essentially those 10 tribes were all lost. That's why they're called the lost 10 tribes of Israel. Like, they're pretty much wiped off the planet. There are no more like tribes of Dan or Zebulon or Naphtali. You're not gonna find people from those tribes today. Obviously, we're all one race, and yeah, it's trickle down, but nobody's gonna know, that, oh, I'm of the tribe of Naphtali. But so after that, though, the southern was taken over, like we said, by Babylon. So when Nebuchadnezzar came in and captured Babylon, that was the end of the reign of the kings of Judah, which was, I think, Zedekiah. Is that right, Brian? Do you know? Somebody can maybe look that up.
From the southern?
From
From the southern or the northern?
No, the southern tribe.
Wasn't Jeroboam and Rehoboam?
Rehoboam and Jeroboam, but I think when Nebuchadnezzar came in, it was Zedekiah, and then he took him out and appointed Jehoiakim and all that stuff.
Good rabbit trail, man.
It is a good rabbit trail.
Very good.
About this kind of
So
it's good. It's a good
always in the memory. But Zedekiah, I know, was the king when he came in, because it's a horrific event told in Chronicles and Kings about what Nebuchadnezzar did to him, because he fled the city. Nebuchadnezzar told them all to come out, and but he ran, and Nebuchadnezzar and his men caught up to him and took his sons and killed them in front of him, and then poked his eyes out and took him. That's the king that was the king of Judah at that time. And then he took him and had him as a blind slave the rest of his life under his table, in his kingdom. So that was the end of that. So the answer is when
That was the
Babylon
last
came
king
in,
that
that
was
was the end of the
blinded.
kings. And then Babylon, like what he's talking about, Babylon appointed, kind of like what the Romans did here, appointed
Right.
their own little
From that
king to
point
be
on.
over the kingdom of the Jews, but Babylon was still in charge, and it didn't matter from that point on. So from that point on, when Babylon came in, the significant thing is Judah and Jerusalem were never their own again. And we call them Israel now today, but understand we're talking about, what is Israel in our view today? That's Jerusalem in that area, which is actually what? Judah. It's actually Judah, okay? Israel would have been more north than that, but we call it Israel, and that's fine. It's part of what used to be Israel. But essentially, that was cut off at that time, and the kingdom line was stopped there. Like I said, we know that Jesus is the fulfillment and is already the king alive and will one day come to fulfill that in his millennial reign and rule from the kingdom in Jerusalem, on the throne of David to fulfill prophecy. For us, there is none of that. And like I said, they were never their own. They were under Babylon, they were under Medo-Persia, they were under Greece, they were under Rome, until when? They are their own now, right?
1968.
There you go. That's right. Well, 68 was
The war.
the Jerusalem 2-day war, or whatever,
Right.
when they got part of Jerusalem back.
Right.
40 something.
It was 47, I
Right.
think, is when Israel actually became a nation.
Yeah.
But they were already at war, like a couple.
Before.
No, they became a nation and then they were already in war, right?
Yeah.
I saw, yeah.
But
That's
that's
what
the
I'm saying. They
but-
became a nation, then like 3 days, something happened, and there was already a war.
But that's obviously a significant point, because
Yeah.
now whatever that was, 47, I think,
Yeah.
Israel became a nation again. And so they are their own again. They have prime ministers, is what they have as leaders. But they're their own.
took
And then
that
about
long.
20 years later, in 68, is when they
That's the
they got Jerusalem back, at least part of it.
That's the generation of the fig tree, supposedly, right? So,
Not going down that rabbit trail. We're going to close first. Great night, gentlemen. Good stuff.